learning goal for the lesson is to develop your understanding of postmodern literature, assisting you with your note-taking and analysis during reading, and, eventually, your essay writing. The first challenge is to define postmodernism. Tony Cliff asserted that postmodernism is the theory of rejecting theories, and this paradox perhaps explains why there is a common consensus that postmodernism is impossible to define. What we can say safely is that all isms challenge the lens through which people previously viewed the world. Postmodernism challenged modernism, and modernism challenged romanticism. In his book Postmodernist Fiction, Brian McHale asserted that modernism is characterized by an epistemological dominant, while postmodernism works are primarily concerned with questions of ontology. Essentially, modernists viewed knowledge as a justified true belief, whereas postmodernists consider truth and knowledge to be socially constructed. Postmodernism has been described as a critique of modernity, therefore it's valuable to do a quick recap on modernism. A fundamental component of modernism is the belief in absolute truths. Modernists believed that objective knowledge of these truths, which could be scientific or moral, could be discovered through the reason of an individual. The combination of individuality and reason is succinctly summarized in René Descartes' maxim, "I think, therefore I am." Descartes' famous line conveys how modernists perceived that every individual was at the center of his or her own universe. This centering of the individual was reflected in modernist literature through the use of stream of consciousness and interior monologue. In contrast, postmodernists believed in relativism, asserting that there are no absolute truths. The truths each individual understands are merely social constructions dependent on race, class, gender, sexuality, and power status. The postmodernists believed that an individual's mind is not the center of their world and their knowledge of it. Furthermore, an individual does not have direct knowledge of anything, not even themselves. Instead, society, language, and concepts establish one's understanding of oneself. To be very postmodern, let's deconstruct the relationship between society, language, and concepts. You will, of course, know that this is an image of a book. But how do you know it's a book? I imagine that when you were a child, people read to you, probably your parents. They used the word book, which you absorbed into your own vocabulary and used. My 2-year-old daughter can identify that Spot the Dog and Crime and Punishment, despite their differences, are both books. How does she do this? Essentially, she does this through concepts. Society has provided her with the word book, and also the concepts that a book is a collection of pages that are bound together. The postmodernist writer might place all his or her written pages unbound in a box, and allow the reader to read the pages in any order that he or she desires. Is the box a book? Essentially, what we are doing with concepts is sorting through a number of entities and deciding what makes them similar in an important way. As a concept, a book is relatively simple. It's a concrete object. Abstract ideas such as marriage are more complex. The concept of marriage is topical in Australia at the moment as marriage equality is being debated. Jacques Derrida would argue that there are two concepts here that need to be deconstructed: marriage and equality. I'm going to focus just on the concept of marriage. In order to understand the concept of marriage, you have to understand other concepts such as love, relationship, husband and wife. Traditionally, institutions such as the Christian Church and governments have asserted that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, therefore heterosexual. However, people arguing for marriage equality assert that the concept of marriage should be socially and legally broadened to enable same-sex marriage because marriage is about love and committed relationships, which is what makes these entities similar in an important way, not about a person's gender or sexuality. When studying a postmodern text, I'd recommend that you develop an understanding of 3 theories in particular: critical theory, reader response theory, and deconstruction. These theories will provide some clarity about why a composer may have chosen to use certain techniques to shape meaning in his or her work. Some of the philosophers and thinkers that I think are important in the development of postmodernism are René Descartes, "I think, therefore I am," Immanuel Kant, who asserted The reason cannot know reality. It only knows its own subjective constructs. Georg Hegel, who believed that the logical contradictions are the point of reality. Reality evolves out of contradictory forces. An example of a logical contradiction is the paradox that truth does not exist. If this statement is true, it is simultaneously false, creating a logical contradiction or a catch-22. Friedrich Nietzsche, who believed that humankind should focus on instinct, that intellect is weak and reason is a tool for weaklings. Martin Heidegger, who criticized reason, which he believed prevented people from questioning why does being be or why does existence exist. Jacques Derrida, who said there is nothing outside context. Michel Foucault, who explored the relationship between power and knowledge. Roland Barthes, who believed the author was dead and focused on the pleasure of the text. Jean Baudrillard, who believed that an individual's attempt to understand the minutiae of their own reality in the modern world leads to a simulated reality or hyperreality. Institutions such as the media and the government rapidly attempt to represent a coherent image of reality. However, they only succeed in fracturing and destabilizing reality, creating a more fearful society. What I've offered here is a very brief synopsis of some of the philosophical ideas that underpin postmodernism. If you're interested in any of the particular ideas espoused, or any of the individual philosophers, I'd encourage you to explore them further. There are some fascinating and informative videos on YouTube. I'd recommend you start with secondary sources before you read the philosophers' primary sources, as these can be quite heavy going. I'm looking in your direction, Heidegger. From the synopsis that I've offered on each philosopher, you start to get an idea about the postmodern view that truth and morality are social constructs and therefore don't exist. The postmodernist rejection of truth and morality was a symptom of World War II, fitting neatly with Derrida's view that there is nothing outside context. The war provided people with plenty of reasons to challenge the accepted structures of the modernist world. After all, modernism embraced science, and science had created the atomic bomb, which was a threat to the world and all life. Knowledge of the horrors inflicted upon fellow humans during the war in the concentration camps challenged many people's belief in God, diminishing the influence of the Christian Church, which previously had provided many people with the absolute truths and moral code that they built their lives around. Joseph Heller's classic postmodernist novel, Catch-22, reflects this movement away from God and the Church in a conversation between Colonel Cathcart and the chaplain. Haven't you got anything humorous that stays away from waters and valleys and God? I'd like to keep away from the subject of religion altogether if we can. The chaplain was apologetic. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm afraid all prayers I know are rather sombre in tone and make at least some passing reference to God. Then let's get some new ones. This brief look at Catch-22 provides an appropriate place to launch into a glossary of techniques that are associated with postmodern texts. Irony, playfulness, and black humour are techniques often used. Intertextuality, which is a reference or parallel to another literary work, an extended discussion of a work, or the adoption of a style. It demonstrates the belief that individual works are not isolated creations. There are relationships between texts. Pastiche is a work of art that imitates the style or character of the work of one or more other artists. Unlike parody, pastiche celebrates, rather than mocks, the work it imitates. Metafiction is a literary device used self-consciously and systematically to draw attention to a work's status as an artifice. Composers may draw attention to the construction of their text through creating a story about a writer who creates a story containing another work of fiction within itself, narrative footnotes which continue the story whilst commenting on it, a book in which the book itself seeks interaction with the reader. Fabulation integrates traditional notions of storytelling, including the fantastical elements such as magic and myth. Poimenon is a specific type of metafiction in which the story is about the process of creation, sometimes the creation of the story itself. Temporal distortion involves fragmentation and non-linear narratives. Magic realism mingles and juxtaposes the realistic and the fantastic and the bizarre. Skillful time shifts, convoluted and even labyrinthine narratives, and plots, miscellaneous use of dreams, myths, and fairy stories. Technoculture and hyperreality. Jean Baudrillard claimed postmodernity was defined by a shift into hyperreality, in which simulations have replaced the real. Paranoia is the belief that there's an ordering system behind the chaos of the world. Fragmentation consists of various elements concerning plot, characters, themes, imagery, and factual references are fragmented and dispersed throughout the entire work. Fragmentation purports to depict a metaphysically unfounded, chaotic universe. It can occur in language, sentence structure, or grammar. It's important to note that a postmodernist composer may use all of these techniques, they may use some of these techniques, or they may not use any. For those of you who will be writing an essay about a postmodern text, I'd encourage you to avoid the shopping list, where you just identify all the techniques used by the composer. Instead, make sure you analyse the effect of each technique. And that's where I think exploring the ideas of Derrida, Baudrillard, Foucault, and Barthes will assist you to maximise your understanding of postmodern texts and therefore improve your essay writing. And that's it. You've made it. To recap the main points of the lesson, postmodernist literature moves away from revealing absolute truths about existence and the human condition. Postmodernism asserts that the understanding each individual has of him or herself, other people in the world, is a social construct. Finally, I gave you a shopping list of techniques commonly used in postmodern text. However, I encouraged you not to regurgitate the list when essay writing. Instead, you should explain how these techniques represent and explore some of the philosophical ideas that underpin postmodernism. So as the orchestra music begins to play, the final thing for me to do is to thank you so much for watching.